Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, welcome back. This is the second part of the evening, as I already announced a little earlier. I will talk you through an exam. I will show you what to expect in an exam, what the criteria are basically, and I will also present an ideal structure of an oral exam. Okay, so let's see. So the big headline of the evening is what to expect in the orals. So the big question of the evening, what am I going to be confronted with as soon as I enter the examination room, as soon as I see the examination board? What do I have to know? What do I have, like what skills do I have to show them, and how is the whole thing gonna be conducted? As you already know, your oral exams consist of two different parts. Altogether, you have a speaking time of approximately 15 minutes. So, yeah, well, half or a little more for the first task. The first task is called individual long turn. That's the fancy name that part one of your exam has. It is usually a presentation or a speech that you have to hold. Both genres, both text types, if you want, already imply that it's only you talking, so the interlocutor will not say much. He or she will be a listener. He or she will be outside of the exam. It's you presenting a topic. It's you holding a speech. It's you presenting the key aspects of the text that you were given, or of the visuals that you were given, or a combination of both. The input text can be, or there's no one input text type, can be different ones. Usually there are three different types of speeches that you can hold. We distinguish between informative speeches or informative presentations. An informative presentation, an informative speech, as the name already implies, you basically tell people what you know about a topic. You're the expert on a certain topic, education in today's example. In the education topic, you, for example, present the hard facts. You compare and contrast the education system in the UK with the one of the United States of America, and then also elaborate on how education works in Austria. So you are the expert and you inform your audience about what you know. Of course, always bearing in mind the bullet points that you have. You have 3 or 4 bullet points, stuff that you have to say or that your presentation basically has to include. I'll talk about that a little later. But then you can also add additional information, stuff that you have brainstormed and prepared in the presentation or in the preparation for your exam. Then there are also explanatory speeches. Explanatory is the adjective to the word explain or explanation. You show people how a certain thing works, what the most important aspects of a topic are, or you try to convince people that what you're talking about is effective in real life. Maybe harder to find an illustrative example for the education topic, but in the environment topic, for example, you talk about certain measures that we can use to protect, help the environment, and you tell your audience why it is, or why it works. So you explain why it is a good concept, why it is a good idea. And the last one is the persuasive speech. To persuade someone, jemanden überzeugen, persuasion, die Überzeugung. So you are in a role that basically says you are, again, you're an expert on a topic, on an idea, and you have to convince your audience that this is a very good idea. Going back to the environment example, your role could basically be you work for Greenpeace, so you're the expert you're an expert at Greenpeace, and you try to persuade other people to join the cause to do something for the protection of the environment. So you have to come up with arguments that basically show people why it is important to take action in a certain direction, in the direction that you want to have them. So we have informative, explanatory, and persuasive speeches. They can be a mix, of course. So usually they will be a mix, actually. You will always have to inform and maybe persuade people in one go. As I already said, you have a role. So you are, for example, the students. Nope. You are the students' representative of your school, and your task is to convince foreign students, as the language is English, probably somewhere in England. You're trying to convince people to take interest in your school, for example. It's your task to foster a student exchange, for example, and you present your school and the Austrian education system to people in England. That's your role. This is the role that you have to follow. So once you were given the role for your presentation, make sure that you stick to it, really be the person that you were told to be, and then just follow the bullet points that you have. As I said, it's usually 3 to 4, depending on how ample the topic is. Follow the bullet points, make sure that you include all of your bullet points, because they give you the main, or they will try and make you talk about the most important aspects that there are to a topic. Good. So, of course, you have preparation time in your exams. This will be 30 minutes for both tasks. So you have 30 minutes for the individual long term, and then also for part 2 of the exams, which is the dialogue with the interlocutor. So here you are also given a role again. The interlocutor does have a role as well. So he or she is not the person taking the exam or examining you, but he or she will also have a role to play. And the aim is to really perform a dialogue, so it should sound as natural and as close to human communication than it gets in an exam situation at the end of the day. In the 30 minutes preparation time, you will probably spend more time for the preparation of part 1, because in the second part, in the dialogue, you do not really know what to expect, what the interlocutor will ask you, or what he or she will say or is going to say. So I prepared some pieces of advice for how to use the preparation time for the individual long term, for the monologue, as effectively as possible. Analyze the text and the visuals that you have. Read the text carefully. If you have an input text, read it carefully. It is not necessary, or it is usually not necessary in such an exam to understand every single word in the text. Usually looking up all too many words in the dictionary is a waste of time. You will always be able to understand the gist of the text without looking up every single word that you cannot translate literally from English into German. Look up the words that you really do not know and that impedes the understanding of the text, but don't waste too much time with your dictionary. It is a useful tool, but you will be able to find out in the course of the reading which words you really have to look up, because otherwise you won't be able to understand the text, and which ones are you can guess from the context, basically. If you analyze visuals, you'll most likely get some statistics to analyze. If I were you, I would not, or it also depends on what sort of graph or chart it really is. I would not analyze everything, single aspect that there is to it. I would focus on the highlights or the all-time lows that there are, if it is a bar chart or a line graph. And also, of course, things that surprise you, simply because then you can add your own personal perspective to the whole thing. In the interpretation of statistics, you could, for example, if we talk about education, you could, for example, say that you were surprised that, according to the statistics, so many people, I don't know, passed the maths A level this year because you thought it would be a lower percentage or whatever. This gives you a chance to add some personal perspective to the whole thing and to show that you've really thought about the visuals and that you're not only reproducing stuff but reflecting on it as well. In the preparation time, that's the time when you present your prompt cards. In the prompt cards, make sure to add some structure. I would already split the talk into the classical, like, 3 parts that every good presentation has. There should be an introduction, a main part, or a body, if you want to call it that, and then some kind of a summary. In the introduction, of course, depending on the task that you have, but in the introduction serves as the moment in your presentation where you obviously introduce the topic. You can do this by simply explaining what the topic is, but you could also make it a little more creative, trying to get your listeners' attention by, for example, introducing the topic by a provocative statement, a joke, an anecdote, some statistics that you've come across, or also something that you've heard on the news recently, kind of as you've all read on Facebook, as you've all heard on the CNN. This and that has happened in the world, so establishing a real life connection between the theory of the topic and your talk. The main part, of course, the most important part of every presentation. Make sure that in your body you clearly state what the purpose of the presentation is. So who are you? Again, mention who you are according to the role card that you were given. Explain the purpose of your presentation. So are you here to convince people about something? Are you here to outline a problem? Are you here to explain a cause, effect, whatever it is? Make sure that in your main part you are focused on your target audience. Again, bearing in mind who you are and who your listeners are. If you are a student representative, as in my previous example, then you are most likely to be talking to students, to fellow classmates, people of your age group. Make sure that you adapt your register and your language. Register is the level of politeness that you use in your speech. So in the introduction, if they are your classmates, you can definitely say stuff like hello guys or whatever, which you cannot do if you're holding a presentation in the role of the marketing executive of a company. So make sure that register and language are related to the target group already in the introduction, but of course also in the main part. Follow the plan of your presentation, so follow your prompt cards. If you've done them right, then you should be able, like, your prompt cards should be arranged in such a way that they correspond to the bullet points. Try to stick to the bullet points and to the plan as much as possible, because if your interlocutor or if the examination board is lost because they don't know what you're talking about and what bullet point you're at, the whole thing gets confusing. So make sure that you stick to the plan. Usually in your body you follow the chronological order of the text that you have, or the bullet points, as I've already mentioned. If you present a problem in your main part in your presentation, also make sure that you offer a solution. If this is possible, it makes it more convincing to not only say, well, this is a problem in the Austrian education system, for example, if we stick to the topic, but also come up with a possible solution, something that you've prepared in advance in the 30 minutes that you had in order to prepare for the exam. So problem plus solution simply functions as a tool to make what you say a little more credible. Also add whatever background information you have. Background info. This is important. This is actually one of the most important points. Make sure that you can prove to the examination board, to your interlocutor, that you've actually done your research, that you've done your homework on the topic. Do not only talk about what is in your input in the text or in the visuals. Make sure that you add some background information that you've researched beforehand. Again, gives you some more credibility and also makes you appear well informed. As the aim of the presentation part usually is to persuade someone about something or to inform someone about something, the more background information, the more off-topic information that you have, the better and the more credible you really are. We all know that in presentations we sometimes do get lost, and if we have to listen to people, we sometimes miss important information because we were still thinking about what had been said beforehand. So if I were you, I would repeat the most crucial facts, the most crucial information. Repeat it, introduce the repetition by one of the linking phrases or by one of the stock phrases that you've hopefully learned by heart by that time. For example, let me once again highlight the importance of a daily sports lesson in school, if we stick to the education topic again. So repeat stuff that you think is the most important aspects. Do your presentation. And in the conclusion, which is a very important part as well, because usually people tend to remember what they heard last. So the conclusion is your chance to leave a very good last impression, to really convince people that you actually know what you're talking about. Give a short summary of what you've said, preferably in different words, so make sure that you do not repeat yourself, so that the exam board or your audience in that case does not have the feeling, oh, he or she has said that already. Make sure that you stick to the same ideas, do not add anything new, but try to rephrase it. Try to prove that you've also studied your vocab and say the same thing again, but don't use the same vocab, the same words, sorry. In the conclusion, you could also add some stylistic devices, add a rhetorical question, for example. Rhetorical question. A rhetorical question, as you all know, a question that you do not necessarily want to be answered by your audience, but a question that should trigger some thoughts. For example, in the information topic, after having heard all that, do you really think that the Austrian education system is as flawless as politicians make us want to believe? Something like this. a question that sticks in the brains of your audience and that gives them something to think about. You can also, depending on your role, include a call for action, going back to the Greenpeace example that I gave you earlier. Usually the task of Greenpeace members or Greenpeace staff is to hire like new staff to convince people to join the cause. So a call for action could be, well, do something for the environment, we only have one planet, whatever, join Greenpeace now. A call for action is a quite good piece of advice because you can once again prove to your examination board that you actually are still in the role and that you are conscious about the role that you're playing in the presentation. So call for action and rhetorical devices, rhetorical questions, perfectly lend themselves for a demonstration of your skills that you are still in the task. You can of course also add an appeal. Not that different to a call for action. An appeal is, again, repeating, guys, do something. We need to do something now before it's going to be too late. Or a look in the future. Why is that not staying? A more or less optimistic or pessimistic view into the future. We only have one planet. If we go on like this, there won't be anything left for our children, for example, would be a more pessimistic look into the future. Also, same strategy, same idea behind it. It will give your audience something to think about, and it makes a good ending for a presentation. Also, make sure that you work with the tone of your voice so that the examination board and your audience, your listeners, know that this was the end of the presentation. And also, if applicable, if it fits the topic, leave some room for questions in case that your role enables you to interact with your audience. You could also pop the question, are there any questions? Did I make myself clear? Something like this. Good. Before I'll give you some more information about what aspects there will be important in your exam. We will have a quick look at what the paired activity looks like, or what you can do to prepare. As I said, it is harder for you to anticipate, or it is very hard for you to anticipate what you will be asked. So you can really only make sure that you know your topic, prepare some background information, and also make sure that you are prepared for both sides of the talk. It is very often, the dialogue part is very often one person is in favor of a certain aspect, the other person is against it. So make sure that you know both sides so that you can, for example, bring all the advantages, or can discuss all the advantages that the Austrian school system has, as well as all the disadvantages that there are. So make sure that you have a very broad overview of the whole topic, and that you're informed and able to play both roles, the person in favor of something, the person against something. Also make sure that you always have a reason for all the opinions that you have. That is also something that you can prepare in advance, or at least to some extent. Make sure that you can explain why you are of a certain opinion, because otherwise you'll probably not be very credible if you cannot explain the cause, basically. As I said, it is a dialogue, and the dialogue is characterized by certain components. You can also ask questions in the exam, like, for example, so what do you think about this topic? Do you agree with me? And so on and so forth, because this would make the dialogue more a real-life interaction between human beings. Make sure that you do not interrupt the person you're talking to, mere politeness reasons, more or less, make sure that you really let him or her finish the sentence. And be prepared for arguments that may not fit your line of argumentation, but it is the interlocutor's task to rebut stuff that you say, and then you can also, of course, rebut what they say and be like, yeah, well, I can see your point, but I have this and that opinion on the topic. Make sure that you keep the level of politeness. Discussions in English are usually held at a very polite level, so always include some features that show your dialogue partner that you actually do acknowledge what he or she says, but you are of a different opinion. So make sure that you keep it nice and polite, nice and sweet for your audience. Good. Let's have a quick look at the so-called interlocutors sheet. Or Beurteilungsbogen, as we call it in German. There is a standardized... Is there a spelling mistake in my German? Okay. There is a standardized interlocutor sheet, a standardized Beurteilungsbogen, divided into 4 different categories, and that is the categories that you will be examined on. That's the categories that you will get a final grade on. So the first one is Erfüllung der Aufgabenstellung. The interlocutor sheet is in German, that's why we're going to do it in German as well. Easy to guess what it is all about. Did you really fulfill the tasks that you have on your sheet, and did you stay in your role? So in other words, did you really include all the bullet points, or at least touch upon all the bullet points? Because what the examination board wants to see is that you are able to talk about a topic in a certain direction that the bullet points basically prescribe. So the bullet points try to give you some direction, they try to steer you into the right direction, and the examination board wants to see that you can talk about all the aspects mentioned, all the aspects that are important. So Erfüllung der Aufgabenstellung is criterion number 1. Second one is Flüssigkeit und Interaktion. Basically, or the basic question is, how well do you really communicate at the end of the day? So how well do you bring across all the points that you want to bring across? How well does the dialogue really work? How much of a dialogue is it really? Was it only you talking, or was it only the interlocutor talking? Did you really go, or did the communication go back and forth between the two of you? Or did you leave questions unanswered? Did you not respond to what he or she said? So that would be the Interaktions part. Then, of course, how fluent is your English? How fluent is the stuff that you say, or how fluently do you really speak? How easy is the communication with you? Ties up or brings in both aspects, I guess. And do you understand the questions that you're asked? And do you react accordingly? Plus reaction. Also falls in category number 2. The third one is the Spektrum gesprochener Sprache. Very important. This criterion basically covers the question, how good or how big is your vocabulary? Is it big enough to fulfill all the tasks that you were given? Is it big enough to talk about all the most important aspects that there are to a topic? Can you explain your opinion and really profoundly talk about something, not only on a very superficial level, but are you really able to react to more complicated questions? Are you really able to touch upon more complicated aspects than only superficial knowledge about whatever topic it is? And also, this point also tries to, or will also grade you on how well you were able to render the text without copying the text. So you should not take full sentences out of the text and reproduce them in an oral way, but only the general idea, and then reproducing it into or in your own words. Ties up with the Spektrum gesprochener Sprache in the sense that you should be able to reproduce ideas that are not necessarily yours but someone else's, and you have to be able to rephrase them, reformulate them in such a way that they sound as if you've said them. And of course, very important as well, die Richtigkeit gesprochener Sprache. Do you use the words correctly? Are there the right Wortarten? So is there an adverb where there should be an adverb? Or did you really use an adjective and not the noun version of the verb? Do you know how to use your vocab? Poverty as the noun to poor and not poorness. Can you really work with the language in such a way that you are able to use the right words in the right context? So target and aim in German both mean Ziel, but then aim is more talking about personal aims, about personal Ziele, whereas target is what you have in, I don't know, computer games, for example. Both means Ziel. Are you able to distinguish between the two words? Do you know when to use which version appropriately, correctly? Richtigkeit gesprochener Sprache is of course also the pronunciation. How well can you speak the language? Do you know how to pronounce the words? Again, in your preparation, nowadays online dictionaries also do give you the opportunity to listen to stuff. So especially tricky words in a topic, in the preparation of the topic, make sure that you know how to pronounce them. There is functions out there that will tell you how to do it, so use them. How correct is your grammar? Of course, ties up with what we already mentioned. We have tenses that are, of course, important. Chapters like adjective, adverb, quantifiers. So much, many, some, any, all these tricky little things. Relative pronouns. Be stuff like who, which, and that. How well do such things work? How well are you really able to use them in your speeches? So again, a quick look. That's the four things, like the four basic main criteria. Erfüllung der Aufgabenstellung, Flüssigkeit und Interaktion, Spektrum gesprochener Sprache und Richtigkeit gesprochener Sprache. So that's what you have to be careful about in your exams. Okay. What else is there to say? Oh yeah, one last thing maybe. Sometimes people find it difficult to work with text, especially if the text is an original text, so an unchanged, unabridged version of a text out of a newspaper or whatever. Some pieces of advice or some things that or some strategies that I usually apply when being confronted with a text. I'd always just read the text first or skim read, depending on how much time you have really. Try and get a main idea of the text first, and also try to find the paragraphs that you need in order to be able to answer your bullet points. So identify the paragraphs that give you the information for your bullet points. Then, of course, in the real, proper, actual reading of the text, I would again highlight the most important information in different colors maybe, so the stuff that you need for your bullet points in orange, and additional ideas that you would like to add in blue or whatever. Just make sure that you highlight all the important stuff. Exclude stuff or exclude aspects or arguments that you do not feel comfortable talking about. aspects that you may have not thought through really, that are new to you, or that you are not prepared to answer questions about, really just leave them out and focus on the stuff that you do know. Focus on the things that you have prepared beforehand. In the summary, we already had that. Use your own words. Do not copy any phrases. Literally, just always render the general idea of what you're gonna present. Yep, I think that was it. I hope that you now know what the exam will look like, and that you can now prepare well for your exams. And I hopefully see you next Tuesday, where I'm going to be doing another stream. Thank you very much and good night.